There you go.
Hey, Patricio, good to see you.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Carl. Good to see everybody today.
So let's start out with the return flow pipeline. And I'm not sure how much I've kept the, or we have kept the collaborative updated on what's happening, because things have happened really quickly, in all honesty. And so we're at a point now where we've made some real progress, in all honesty. So let's step back a little bit. So we have now formed a coalition, and that's really kind of the collaboratives taking a leadership role in that coalition. And it's a pipeline coalition specifically to address the issues of the reduction of flow in the river, the 50% reduction in flow in the river. And that's really what we're looking at, is a stakeholder-driven mitigation plan. So at our last meeting, it was Jamie Park with the Asaki Association who brought some other ideas that Bill Schneider and Jesse Roach kind of looked at and said, let's talk. And so there was a meeting of representatives from the coalition, and help me here, it's Darren, Jamie, Enrique Romero, who's the attorney for the Asaki Association, and the fourth person I'm forgetting at the moment, and that's embarrassing. But 4 people met with the city folks and actually came away with it feeling pretty good that we have an opportunity to actually do something pretty positive with the city. And so that really kind of was in a sense, the catalyst for us to form the coalition. And since then, we've had a number of interesting developments. The city, I'm not sure, I'm trying to find out right now whether or not the city has approved the agreement between the county and the city in terms of the pipeline. And there is rumor that the county will have a stronger position in terms of the mitigation plan, but there's no details yet about exactly what that means. And then on Tuesday of this week, time flies, we were asked to do a presentation before the county commission. So it was myself, Darren, and Roger Taylor was there to kind of witness what was going on. But I felt we had a really strong, positive response from the county commission. And I think they're fully supportive of what we're doing. And I think the real goal of the coalition is to develop a stakeholder network, in a sense. We are planning to have stakeholder liaisons that represent each of the different stakeholder groups. And then we can, the goal is to be able to reach out to all of those stakeholders on any particular issue pretty quickly and get back information in terms of what they would like to see done or things that they would like to see us take on. And it seems we haven't formed that yet. In all honesty, one of the problems of the coalition, we're not very structured yet. We likely will create an executive committee of some sort, and that probably will just be the stakeholder liaisons. And I'm kind of just talking off the top of my head right now, because this is certainly stuff that we haven't finalized or completely discussed. But I think it is a real opportunity to have some force in terms of what's going on with the river. And we certainly seem to have support. One of the things that came out of the meeting or presentation before the county commission was that Anna Hansen wants to take that management plan for what they call the Santa Fe Preserve, or the artificial wetlands, take it back to the Santa Fe River Commission and have them help look at that. And again, we know that was done before, and I was able to dredge up the documents. One of them was the letter from Page Grant in 2002, saying we've got a problem in setting up this plan for the wetlands. Hey, Darren, glad you're here. And setting up the plan for the wetlands in 2002, and says, hey, we need to get more input from the community, basically. And then in 2008, they actually come up with a plan, then it's revised in 2010, and then it just dies. It disappears and never seen the light of day. And so Commissioner Hanson wants to bring that back to the commission, Santa Fe River Commission, and have them work on that, obviously with a lot more community input than they've had in the past. So I think that's a real positive. Darren, I'm just trying to go over our presentation before the commission on Tuesday. And in a second, I'm going to let Darren talk about the one side of his particular interest in terms of the water quality and a federal process to be able to do that fairly quickly. One of the problems we had with the coalition is we need to have some protocols in terms of communications. We had one member who sent a barrage of emails to everybody in the world, and I got some pretty strong feedback from people that that wasn't appropriate. So we're going to work on protocols in terms of communicating within our organization, within the structure of the coalition. So Darren, you want to talk about what your kind of interest and what you presented?
Okay, really it was more along the lines of providing some type of positive concrete steps forward as opposed to where we've been at for the past at least 10 years, specifically on the lower Santa Fe watershed, in expressing concerns and listing possible alternatives and coming up with more subjects to study and trying to gather data and be able to present that. Where this all has come to the forefront now is that the county and the city have entered into this joint agreement for a return flow pipeline to get some paper water. And the feasibility of that is elevated based on a 2017 study that they completed with that City Water completed with the Bureau of Reclamation, really looking at their supply portfolio. And as we looked at that study, what we found is that there were some assumptions that the feasibility on reuse of water coming out of wastewater treatment facilities in Santa Fe was only feasible for something like dump it back in the Rio Grande and get some paper water for it so that we can get more San Juan Chama water. The fact is there is diminishing wet water available, whether the city and the county have water rights to it or not. And so the feasibility of that return flow pipeline to get return flow credits and increase the supply out of the Buckman diversion is only there because the assumption is made that the Paseo Real wastewater treatment facility is deteriorating and is near either the end of its life cycle or is only capable of doing so much in terms of reusing water or total reuse of treated potable water or any of those other options. I think there were 7 alternatives that the Bureau of Reclamation study came up with, and the most feasible as of 2017, because of the condition of the wastewater treatment facility, raised up a return flow credit pipeline to the top of the feasibility scale. There are other alternatives that look a lot better, especially as we consider the climate emergency, but it's an interesting time because there's an opportunity for maybe the city to go to the federal government for infrastructure money and address some of the physical operational problems of that facility, or that may even then change the feasibility. So in order to do this, and in order to watch the county's interest as being a partner with the city in any type of pipeline or reuse of treated effluent, I think it's important that we've suggested to start using an environmental management system. The language in the city-county agreement calls for a stakeholder-driven mitigation plan for the lower Santa Fe River watershed. The city has some ideas on what that means, but nothing really concrete. And I think what we've thought is that in their application process, because the wastewater is federally regulated by EPA and has certain standards, then maybe we could assist them in getting their NPDES, their National Pollution discharge elimination system permitting done and meeting some of the requirements with that. But we could ask them to go further and have a environmental management system that is really ISO 14001 based. In which case, it's not just, let's have a meeting to make this one plan, and sort of the same thing that happened with that wetlands management, it just disappears because there's no recurring cycle built into the mechanism. So where an environmental management system more generally calls for an annual management review, be that the city or the county, and stakeholder participation regularly, and a recurring 3-year audit and replan cycle. It's something that we could make sure stays alive and continues to evolve with the conditions. If you look at it, we're looking, all of the decisions we're being asked to consider right now were based on a study that's 4 years old and may not have had more realistic considerations as to what we're finding. The water's diminishing everywhere. The climate emergency continues. The feasibility has changed and the necessity has changed since 2017. If we have an environmental management system, I think integral to which is this stakeholder-driven mitigation plan, then we have a chance to keep up with it, and it evolves as the situation evolves, and we're actually able to manage it. But at this point, nothing like that exists. There's no, at least I mean, here in our region, in our communities. It's being done by other wastewater treatment facilities around the country, and the EPA piloted a project in 2000 to get wastewater treatment facilities on board with this type of management system, and they see the benefit of it. It's not mandatory, so it's not required by the EPA, but it is a recommendation. And that same standard is at the foundation of most of federal regulation. They've already been thinking of it that way. So it seems like there's an opportunity for the city to make progress in their environmental management, the stakeholders to see the benefit of a proper, what they call a Deming cycle or a plan, do, check, act cycle in action, where we get to evaluate the measures that we're taking and adjust. When there's non-conformities, we can take corrective action. Then we can see how the corrective action goes, and we can figure out new alternatives. So it's repeating cycles of visiting this, but instead of repeating cycles of having meetings and coming up with concerns, you can actually have a greater hand in implementation, and then monitoring and corrective action if we find that implementation choices are insufficient or need enhancement or what have you. And I hope I'm making it as simple as possible.
Let me summarize just a little bit. It's like what we are looking at is basically building a stakeholder body that's here, that's going to be sustained through time, that works with the city and with the county in terms of addressing issues, that it's not just this one time that we got together and we did this one thing and yippee, we're done. But this is a body that remains in place, sustained over time, that is a resource. And I think that's really one of the things that we need to get the city and county on to understand, is what an incredible resource we are as stakeholders, and that we really have a tremendous amount of knowledge in this group. And that's one of the things I pointed out at the county commission meeting, and that we need to take advantage of this. And the idea of having a permanent entity that's able to respond to concerns about water is something that's outside of government, is something that is really important and necessary, especially in these times. I'm going to allow, Mike, do you want to respond to any of this in terms of what's going on with the treatment plant?
I didn't really have much of anything to say. I mean, the plant's running fine and we haven't had any issues as of lately. We are finishing our construction on our aeration basins pretty close to the December area. So they'll be back in service again. I don't really have much to say on it. I was just kind of taking it all in, trying to understand what it is what the group is really trying to do. I mean, I understand bringing the group's knowledge and information to the table that's really great. Um, I am I am at a awkward point because I'm part of the city, but also part of the neighborhood. So it's a little awkward for me in that case. I mean, I'm not really sure. I mean, I don't have much to say about it.
Can I ask you a couple questions, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have heard conversation about life cycle planning for the infrastructure at the plant, and that's an element of ISO 14001. And I'm wondering just, is there a specific environmental management system in effect right now where we might be reinventing a wheel that we know we don't need to? Maybe what we can do is tighten the spokes on the one that we have, you know?
Well, the life cycle analysis on the plant is actually right now currently being done through the EPA. That
Okay.
should be, I think, probably, I want to say sometime before December, we should actually know where everything's at on it. We barely, about a month ago, finally got everything of information for previous years, baselines, everything submitted to the company that's actually doing it for the EPA. So it's a third party. It's not actually them doing it. Once all that is completed, then pretty much that figures out, you know, we have to figure out our next 10, 15 years, but that's going to kind of judge where it's going to go on at least plant process, whatever's going to happen here. So, I mean, there's previous studies like the one you're referring to, but there's not anything that's, you know, set in stone until we hear that, because we don't want to start doing, you know, a further plan like water has already started before we get that information.
Right. Okay. And I guess that's kind of what I'm seeing. So if I understand it right, the life cycle planning is kind of its standalone project at this point, right?
Yes, it's standalone to a point because it's something that everyone wanted to look at. EPA suggested it just for the fact that we have the impairment that's in the lower Santa Fe River area. We have information that, you know, everything that is here at the plant can run and do the work. It just can't get any further. It's already to the point where it's at, you know, it has, all the processes are to the point where you can tweak it a little more, but it isn't going to be very much more. Now, expansion and additions to make the plant work better, or any kind of feasibility on building any kind of new equipment or interfacing anything else into it, we wanted to figure out, first of all, what the life cycle is going to look like for that kind of equipment, what kind of things would be, you know, availability, cost, what it's really going to turn into, basically, because at one point there had been conversation of putting in RO systems. Well, RO systems are great, but now I have to get rid of whatever rejects coming from the RO system. And then I have to figure out some way to make that RO water less aggressive to put it in a river. So it starts causing more issues than it would even be worth to take it down to an RO system. Well, technology is getting better, and there are different systems and different chemical processes that can get to the same point of what we were suspecting or looking towards in future permitting or future testing out in the river. So part of the life cycle analysis is taking each one of these systems and vetting them for what it would take. Now, I really was stressed out more with the RO system. I mean, I can purify the water to a point, and I can get it less aggressive and put it out into the river. That's not a big problem. My huge issue with that was the reject, and the only plan of getting rid of the reject was putting it back into the ground in an injection well, a deep injection well. And I just don't like that personally. But I mean, it's still on the chopping block, and they'll still figure out, you know, if that analysis comes true that it's the right thing to get done in their eyes, then that may be something the city would look at. But really at the moment, I think it's a hurry up and wait. We have to make sure that everything that we're gonna work on is gonna be something good for everybody in the future, stakeholder, environment, everything. I mean,
Right.
we
Right.
can't
So
just,
to that
turn
end,
the key and say, buy it.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
I'm saying we can't just turn the key and say, buy it, put it online, and let's make it happen. Because,
Right.
you know, it may be great and wonderful for us to pass a permit, but it could be bad for everything downstream, or an
Right.
aquifer, or whatever else it is.
Well, so what I'm hearing is that even that life cycle analysis, like you say, is a standalone project, and you've got a consultant working on that. But I don't see where it fits into an environmental management system. So, for instance, are there people on your staff or in your division that are considered internal auditors and looking for nonconformities in operations or procedures or key processes or core processes or anything like that?
So the environmental management inside of the facility is, so let me get to the point where it's a little more environmental management for the group, this group, is a different animal than the environmental management for the group here at the plant. Now, what is being done here is to keep complying with regulated rules and permits that are already in place, or upcoming permits that could possibly change. So everybody that's looking at it, from the operator to the supervisors, it's trying to make sure that the plant and is physically in compliance, and what's going out of the rear of the plant, that's the treated water, is in compliance. It's not looking towards how that treated water is affecting the watershed. It's not looking towards, you know, how that treated water flows, the amounts that stay above ground, what goes underground. It doesn't look at any of that. So in that assessment, if there was a way that everybody was working together looking at the actual Santa Fe River, that would be completely different.
Right. Well, and that may lead you to an opportunity to be proactive in meeting compliance requirements. So it's kind of one of the big challenges, and one of the purposes of an EMS, an environmental management system, be it, well, if it was ISO 14001 based, that would be one of the elements, is that it continues. So say hypothetically there was the inability for the plant to meet a requirement of the NIPD's permit, and there would be a potential for a violation. There would be a process in EMS where we'd be able to check the corrective action. Then there would be a cycle that says, okay, we have a corrective action plan. We've implemented this. Let's go back and check on that, and then see if that was successful, and then move on to adjusting the rest of the plan. All of this recurs on 3-year cycles, and especially by management is reviewed annually. So you should have some form of internal auditing where you meet that standard. The standard is where you start to get out of one specific project and into the broader effects of not just the wastewater treatment plant, but ideally how the plant plays into city water's supply, and the whole system viewed integrally or holistically, as opposed to wastewater being separate from city water, especially because city water's portfolio option right now is thinking about or heavily considering using the treated effluent, or using treated wastewater, or using total reuse or partial reuse, or any of these other options. If those become, instead of looking at those as, oh, now there's an individual project, it used to be feasibility number 3, now we're just going to focus on that with the blinders on, and we look at that without other opportunities or other risks. So really what I'm proposing, or why I'm a proponent of an environmental management system, is that it identifies opportunities as well as risks and potential failures. So I think that is the basis for my submitting that to the collaborative and to the coalition as an alternative for moving forward with these issues, because I see it, and the EPA recognizes it as being effective for other municipalities or wastewater treatment facilities. So, but what I'm hearing is that there really is no environmental management system per se, because it doesn't meet the elements of one, the way I hear that things are being dealt with.
Not for anything external to the actual facility.
Right, okay.
Not in that aspect.
Okay, thanks.
Carl, Felicity's had her hand up for a bit, so.
Okay. Please, Felicity.
Hi, everyone. Well, I think my question may have been answered through that exchange with Mike and Darren, because what I'm wondering, I just so fully support moving forward with Darren's proposal and this structure. And I just wasn't sure if you guys actually presented that at the county when you spoke on Tuesday or not, and how the response was.
We were pressed for time, and fortunately we were preceded by County Water discussing their water bank buffer and all the paper water options and plans. And again, what we heard is that planning is being done on the 5-year, 10-year, 25-year, 40-year basis, and it's not happening on a recurring cycle with an annual review or a 3-year auditable program. So it's kind of, it's really not realistic to be doing, in the conditions that we're in right now, such far projections without having our finger on the pulse of how the system works, from supply to reuse or treatment. That's where I think an ISO 14001 system fits in and closes that gap, right? And really helps city water, helps them understand the impact of wastewater treatment division on their core processes, and that cycle continues and can't help because of the standard to involve stakeholders. It's in the standard. So it's not like it has to be a management decision per se by either one entity.
Thanks.
Thoughts right now?
The commission did get handouts that I sent to most everybody with the excerpts from the EPA's pilot project. So we were able to give those to them with the links to where they could see the EPA's findings and studies along these lines and their recommendations. But we didn't speak on it too much. The introduction, I think, was necessary to give the commissioners that are sitting there now, that weren't the same commissioners that were sitting there in 2011 when the drought mitigation resolutions were first put forth and approved, and really were the basis for the foundation of this collaborative, right? So I think it was good to get that introduction, and Carl was great at expressing how long this collaborative's been working on these issues, and we were able to provide the basic idea, the general idea, through those handouts and excerpts, though. So I think that's up to, I hope they're reviewing it, you know.
Thank you.
I did get a comment back from Commissioner Hughes about he felt we did a really good job in terms of the presentation. Michael, getting back to you. Now we all know that the wetland is a real issue, and certainly something that needs to be addressed as part of this mitigation plan. But one of my concerns right now in this moment is the quality of water that comes out of that wetlands. Does anybody do any kind of testing of that?
No, we do not. I don't know if
Okay, so I mean, what we've heard repeatedly is that no matter how clean you may be able to get the water, that by the time it goes through that wetlands, it's as dirty as it was before. Is that correct?
Not necessarily as dirty as it was before. It would be higher in nutrients is what I would believe is coming out through there. So it wouldn't be per se like, you know, human waste. It'd be more high in nitrates or ammonias, from all the dead and down that goes in there of, you know, every year we see the cattails and everything grow up really beautiful, and then all of a sudden winter comes and everything's trampled down. So a lot of that stuff just goes into the ground and it's all it's doing is adding nutrients back to that soil. Whenever we get rushes of rain, it compounds it and mixes it all up, and it's back to the same point again.
Would you suggest they do testing outside the wetlands?
For the group, that may be possibly something valuable for informational wise. I mean, I know we probably wouldn't be able to swing that very often, if any time, other than for reference sampling.
How about the wells of people that live along the river?
I have no idea. I haven't had my well tested yet. I actually live right on the river. And mine's probably about 300 yards from where there's actual water at the most.
How deep is it?
I don't know how deep that well is. I haven't researched that yet.
Okay. Do you think that this is one of those concerns I have, and I think I'd like to add contribute to this, is there a need to post signs about the quality of water in the river?
I don't think there would be. I mean, higher nutrients isn't going to affect anyone per se, and like swimming around in it or walking by it, I don't think it would matter much. But I'm not the right person to be figuring whether that's correct or not, or if it's going to affect animals or anything. I have no idea.
Mr. Siri, can I call upon you to have some comments?
Well, I know Andy would prefer I didn't speak sometime. I don't think I would like any signs put up, and what I drive by there a number of times every day. You know, it's commonly 3 or 4 times, and I can't do it 3 times a day. I've got to do it 2, 4, 6 times a day, and I don't see people in the river, or I just don't see that. I would comment particularly on what Michael just said, was something about not worrying about swimming in that water. What I would like to see is I would like to see some testing at Kai Dever at the end of the city's improperly constructed wetlands. And in Arizona, where they established wetlands, constructed wetlands to assist with cleaning the water, they have responsibility to test the water coming out of their wetlands, and that's not happening here in Santa Fe. One of the things that Michael may be, sure.
But just to mention that, as you mentioned, Arizona, Scottsdale wastewater treatment facility is ISO 14001 certified and does have regularly audited procedures and does test their outfall, and because it's part of the system. So it doesn't fall on community groups and activists to organize and do citizen science. It falls on the responsibility of the entity that is treating the wastewater to assess and manage their environmental posture in the greater community.
I agree. I agree with that 100%. What I would suggest to Michael is, I'm not a water quality expert, but I can read a little bit and I can remember a little bit. One of the things that I have read is the water coming out of that plant is not supposed to have any visible foam on the surface, and no algae at the bottom of the stream where it comes out. What I would tell you is I'm 3 or 4 miles down the river and the water is covered with foam, big mats of foam, and the bottom of the river was solid algae up until we had the rains last week. And so this is 3 or 4 miles down, not just coming out of your pipe, is what I would say. And then if you were to look at some of the constituents in the water, I think you might not want to swim in it.
All right. I tend to agree with it. I think maybe we're at a point we can, as the collaborative, request some of these things, and certainly I'll bring it to the attention of the coalition. Coalition is kind of looking at future things, and these are things that are happening right now. And I think it's really important that we not neglect these just because we're making a bigger plan down the road. That there are immediate plans and concerns of things that we need to have looked at. And so I think that's something that certainly we should focus on over the next few weeks. Any other comments? Ed?
Well, the comments that I have, and I think comments that we made 9 or 10 years ago was in regards to the wetlands. And here it's been 10 years, and Michael just made the comment that the wetlands were a hazard, and he just mentioned the nutrients. Trust me, there's many other things in that water other than the nitrates or the phosphates that should be of concern. And in my opinion, and I voiced this a week or two ago at the LCVA meeting, was that I think we need some immediate action to remediate the problem that we've caused by establishing the improperly constructed wetland. I don't mean let's talk about it for 10 more years. I mean, let's solve the problem and get that fixed immediately. And what I would tell you, in my opinion, having studied this and read 1,000 journal articles, is that all that green should not be there. And we would be much better off if that water was running down a barren arroyo. We would have much healthier water, and the members of our community would be much safer. So I think that wetland needs to be removed. I've thought quite a bit on how to do that, and I thought, and I mentioned last week at a meeting to our county commissioner, Rudy Garcia, he suggested we get a few goats in there to clean it up. And I said, we need about 2,864 goats, but I think a D9 Caterpillar tractor might work a little better. And then I've thought about it for quite a bit. And the problem is we've got water that's supplying, the plant is supplying water and nutrients and other things to those wetlands. And I'm not so sure that a pipe around those wetlands, so we don't keep watering them, might help. I'm not sure how to get rid of all the green, but I think that's top of our list, is to get rid of all the green. The other thing I'm concerned about is, and I know Darren and the folks down the river further are concerned about, its quantity of water. And I think I've seen some estimates that 70% of that water is going into our groundwater. It's not tested. It also includes the city runoff. And I don't know the figure off the top of my head of the evaporation from the pooled water or the evapotranspiration from the trees. I suggested to Jesse Roach that he put water meter as the river enters my farm, and we can make some calculations pretty easily that way. And so those are some of the things that have been of concern to me and other residents downriver.
So I'm hearing two. Go ahead, Andy.
I was just going to point out that, remember, we have Ryan Mann's study of 2 years ago, that is, by the way, is on our website if you want to read it, where he analyzed the reaches of the river below the wastewater treatment plant, whether they were gaining or receding. So a lot of that work you're talking about, Ed, has been done, and it's in that study.
Yeah, I have reviewed Ryan Mann's study, and I wanted to get him to come out and visit with me on it, and I wasn't able to get him out. One of the things that if you look at the hydraulics and the hydrology, I mean, in the river, where they talk about, Casey Simmons, Peggy Johnson talk about the gaining and losing areas. Their work was done after the treatment plant had put water in the river for years. And there was, prior to that, there was no water coming down in this lower section of the river. So it makes me wonder, when you do these studies and you say it's gaining or losing, the place where they think it's gaining, that may be treated wastewater. Is that understandable?
Well, sure. And of course, Ryan's study was during the course of his time when he was there. It didn't include any historical because he didn't have any.
Maria, is Ryan working with the county now? I thought he's doing some contract work. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know anything about that, but we haven't been in the office very long, and so I'm a little out of the loop. I can do some research.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason, I thought that Angeli or John mentioned that he was going to be doing something with those folks, so that would be appreciated. But I guess two things what I'm hearing is, one, we need to test the water as it comes out of the wetlands, both for water quantity and water quality, and start documenting that more effectively. And I don't think those are unreasonable requests that we can make of the city and / county. And again, I go with Ed in terms of it needs to be done now, not 5 years or 10 years from now. And that's really one of the things that is an overriding concern of the coalition is whether we can sustain this and actually have something that people will buy into and be a part of. And I'm avoiding the word enforcement because it's kind of a harsh word. But there has to be legs in this whole agreement that we're going to have with the city and the county, something that withstands time and the changes of administration and changes in staff, because that's always an ongoing concern when you're dealing with bureaucracies that tend to change those positions fairly quickly. And so that's really an overriding goal for the coalition, is to have something in hand that we can sit back and say, hey, we did a good job, and this is something we can all trust and move forward. And I keep the more I'm around our elected officials, the more I'm convinced there really is a sincere interest in terms of making this happen. Now, when we get into the bureaucracy, that changes just a little bit, because we have people that have been there for a long time and have their own ways of doing things. And having been a member of many bureaucracies, I understand that. But I think that's why this idea of having an established group that basically becomes a permanent resource for water issues in Santa Fe County would be something that would be of great benefit, and then certainly would include a whole lot of membership organizations and groups that would be called upon when necessary, just to walk or talk through things that need to be addressed. Excuse me. Darren.
I want to just point out and kind of tie this together between the collaborative and the coalition. And what we saw when it came to, if you compare all of the work and the effort and the thinking and the participation of this collaborative over the last 10 years to the mobilization that took place and formed a coalition over a specific issue like a return flow credit pipeline, okay? And you look at the mindset that drove that, who first, came out the gate right away with the coalition was all of our legal support, all of our legal advocacy organizations, from the Secca Association, initially from the Environmental Law Center, looking at these issues in terms of, like you're saying, Carl, enforcement, which ultimately leads to liability, which ultimately leads to negative environmental impacts, right? And all very reactive, and then puts us in a position where we have to suggest things to the city or the county, or request that they do this piece by piece, measure by measure sort of activity, as opposed to using an environmental management system where we see these things coming, and these concerns get filtered into to what process do we apply this, in what way can we monitor our actions, and in what way can we either see nonconformities coming or address them before they turn into violations of regulations and fines and other impacts. So I think that's what's important in shifting toward an environmental management system, as opposed to just looking at injunctive relief or liability and damages mitigation in that respect. I think we're talking about physical mitigation and remediation of the problems we're seeing in the lower watershed, as opposed to mitigating damages in the legal term of art sense. So again, to keep on being the cheerleader for ISO 14001, that's where I think the opportunity is for us to change our posture from being a reactive one to being a proactive one. And it seems like that these other concerns fall naturally into place in a system that's already structured like that.
Hey, Aaron, can I call upon you to give us some idea of the infrastructure money that's going to be available for water projects? Do you have any sense of that?
Not yet, Carl. We've been watching this movement, interesting, with great interest. And so I would say no, not yet. But what we do have a sense of through some of the organizations we're involved with, including waterreuse.org and American Society of Civil Engineers, is that we do expect to see more nature-based solution type of funding available versus like gray infrastructure, right? So, and there may be gray infrastructure money also, but we do anticipate more, more focus on nature-based solutions that might have a climate impact, piece too. Carl, so I don't know yet, and we've been kind of anxiously waiting to see, because we think it's going to impact, the whole industry potentially, that does the kind of restoration water work. And I don't know if the city or the county have been gearing up or have, some folks on board to look at what that funding might mean for the city and county, but I suspect it could be good. Yeah, that's what I would say. And one thing, it's Darren, it's really interesting hearing you talk about environmental management systems. I was wondering if this group has contemplated, or if this has been, achieved in the past, but like a holistic water plan, and maybe this is a question for the Watershed Association and, and Felicity too, like, from the headwaters to the terminus, but really, because so much of this is tied in with the wastewater treatment plant, sort of the lower reaches. Is there a comprehensive plan in which you could put in the things like the testing of this wetland system and sort of the understanding of the treatment plant upgrades and the pipeline? It seems to me like there's so many moving parts. Is there any kind of document or approach or strategy of looking at them kind of interconnected?
I think you've offered the perfect segue into Andy's update on the watershed planning process.
Great.
Andy?
Sure, I'll unmute myself. There we go. So the answer is no, there is not currently a watershed plan. However, what we are currently underway with is a phase 1 Water Smart grant to start doing the background for a watershed plan, phase 1, which includes stakeholder input, And then also, of course, mapping and resource cataloging, if you will. And I think of just about everyone here, but basically the consultants, who was Courtney Flint from Utah State University, they completed about 160 interviews, of which so many folks here were involved. And now the next steps that they completed is kind of consolidating those responses and concerns down to about 90. The next step will be to bring those forward back to everyone and say, what, are these valid? What can we do? They hope to get them down to maybe 50 by about October. That's called, it's using a Q sort process. And then, and basically complete that aspect of this phase 1 of the watershed plan by about June. Additionally, the mapping is pretty much done now, although I haven't seen it. But it's been worked on for about a year, and it's pretty cool. I mean, when I say pretty cool, is that it's like, we always assumed that our watershed was 184,000 and some change acres, and it's not, according to them. And they haven't released the official number yet, but it's around 160,000 to give you an idea. So anyway, we hope to complete those roughly by June. And then it will be sent back to the WaterSmart folks and Bureau of Reclamation, and then we will be allowed to apply for phase 2, which starts the next steps of the actual planning process. So first, we're getting the mapping and the the community input, and then the next phase will be to actually start working on elements of a plan. And it's being divided into upper, middle, and lower watershed. Of course, it's the whole watershed, but the notion being is that so much of the concerns are specific to upper, middle, and lower aspects of the watershed. So it's moving forward, which is way cool.
That's great.
Now, Aaron, I'm going to give you a magic wand, okay? And I want you to wave it over that treatment plant. What would you see if you could do anything you wanted to do with that facility?
Nothing like putting me on the spot there, Carl.
I hope so.
Well, I know that there's a lot of different moving parts in terms of upgrades and considerations for, optimizing what's there right now. I would certainly think what we're seeing, and if I was to wave a wand, if you would, and I'm not sure that it's magical thinking, but I do think that the movement towards carbon neutrality with water treatment and reducing the carbon footprint that is required for managing our water resources is an important part of climate mitigation work. And so making that connection between the energy that we use to clean water and the carbon impact. And I know there's been solar and other pieces put in, and it's a pretty large number to treat water. And so both on the supply and the discharge side, and to pump it and to move it. And with this potential pipeline, right, of return to the Rio Grande, there's going to be a carbon footprint with that. So I would say, a very aggressive strategy towards carbon neutrality within our water infrastructure as a whole, water supply and wastewater treatment, is where we're seeing a lot of people move, and it's very difficult. It is not the lowest hanging fruit, but it's a part of the mix, nationally, and getting our carbon footprint down. And I think for Santa Fe with this abundant solar resource is something to consider. And so that means things like moving towards lower energy unit processes, harvest, and there are already things happening, right? Like, so harvesting biogas and all of these pieces and parts that I think have already been on the radar, but to me that becomes a central goal and maybe an angle for getting some of that funding in place, is reframing so many of the problems we have around water as climate issues too. And so there's that piece. And I do think a biofiltration treatment wetland that's engineered to buffer the water does still make some sense there. I mean, I don't think that's changed. And that was partly why I was asking about a holistic planning for that lower piece, because there are some challenges with seasonal, kind of growth and die off of wetland plants. And there's some natural processes that come into play in these open systems, right? Versus our more engineered, treatment infrastructure systems. So, the reason why the natural system partly may make sense there too is because it really can reduce the energy footprint, the carbon piece. And wetlands can become carbon sinks. And so you can actually fix carbon. So if I was to wave my wand, it's probably some hybrid of, kind of the best mechanical treatment systems and filtration and maybe membranes even that we have. And then the partnership with these natural systems to bring the energy piece as low as we can and to provide, other amenity, right? And hopefully in a way that doesn't become a problem for people downriver. That is certainly, I would say, something that needs to be better understood. And, I've seen the mats of algae, I know what that is all about. And so I do think, creating that kind of clean feeling, clean experience of the river, no matter what we do, is important.
Interesting. Are there any plants like that now?
Yeah, I think there's a handful of them out there. And I heard some mention of some projects in Arizona. I can't remember the exact, like the Trace Rios. There's a handful of interesting kind of wetland hybrid systems that do exist. There's the classic one up in Eureka, California. Yeah, there are a handful.
Now, are those systems or those facilities been retrofitted, or they've been designed initially as that way?
Usually retrofit. And there's one in Washington State for Seattle. And I think I'd showed some slides of it before here at one point of, it was designed as a community visitor center. The wastewater treatment plant is like a place you go, kids go. The architecture is really compelling. There's kind of the experience of water. It's very artistic. Just totally drawing a blank on the name of it. I could get it in the chat here in a minute. But people redesigning treatment plants as places for the public, places for the community to connect you to that water piece. I'd say that I'm seeing more commonly than, I'm not sure that there's any like carbon neutral wastewater treatment plants yet. I don't know. It's a good question. And I think that is where, like places in California have seemed to be leading the way in that direction. But I think it's the challenge of our time to try to figure out how to get the energy out of the water.
I think there are carbon neutral designs out there.
Yeah.
I just sent an article to Felicity and Carl, because I don't have the group email, with an article about that from a couple years ago. It's not the greatest article, but it's hard to find stuff about this.
Could I ask a question? I would like to hear comments from any or all of you, is how, particularly maybe Aaron, how can we remove all that green vegetation as soon as possible? I raised this subject years ago, and is there some idea that I haven't come up with other than getting a plane to fly over with some environmentally acceptable herbicide, crop duster plane to fly up and down the river a couple times to kill all that vegetation, or putting in a pipe to get around it? Has anybody got any other ideas of how to remove that vegetation or get the water away from our original river channel?
I'm stunned silence. Ed, I think that we need to have somebody do an assessment. And I think you're the one that has repeatedly pushed, it's got to be a third party outside of any governmental control that can come in and really assess what needs to be done there and how quickly it can be done. So I don't have a good answer for you other than that.
Aaron?
Well, certainly my instinct would be to not solve the problem by removing the vegetation. I think that there's a lot of biodiversity in other pieces and parts. And if the problem, and I'm not very familiar with the problem, so I need to qualify that because I haven't seen any data before or after it, and I have not myself dug into that wetlands piece per se, but you know, if there are seasonal cycling of nutrients, that could be part of the problem, but there's, you know, yeah, I think that it's a larger issue than to just say cleaning out a wetland, which is, you know, usually the other way is where everyone is going. more wetlands, more biodiversity, more riparian treatment. But with that said, like if there are water quality problems in the river, and that's why I was asking if there was a holistic look at this that has all these moving pieces considered, because you push one thing and something else happens, you pull another and something else happens. And it's, my guess is that it's a relatively complex system. And because that wastewater, because the river is 100% wastewater, right? Downstream of the wastewater treatment plant, except for when it rains, it's a unique problem that is not that common. You know, here in the Southwest, you'll see it, but in most places, you're not going to see 100% wastewater rivers. And so it does likely have some complexity involved with the nutrient cycling, the interactions with the soils, the groundwater, the plants, right? But I would be very hard pressed to say that I think it's a good idea without more understanding to remove, you know, a wetland or certainly a riparian corridor.
Aaron, have you got any comments, any ideas?
I was just actually looking to see the ISO 14001 status of King County Waste Treatment Division, and they I don't know if they're actually certified, but they're using the principles. And they have a more integrated, holistic approach to this. And I think, again, yes, that's a primary concern is the amelioration, the remediation of that wetlands now. We know that. The channel needs to be redredged, and the ridge and swale system that impedes the water there up to 200 acre feet from our last special water masters report needs to be modified and that vegetation treated, whether that's physical removal with the caterpillar. I'm not necessarily in favor of herbicides or that type of thing, but be that as it may, I think to answer Aaron's question, it is completely disjointed. Supply and the recycling and reuse are completely disjointed from each other. And that may be because of the, well, it's maybe for lack of political will or the avoidance of liability and responsibility. But again, that's something where subject matter expertise, like we're getting from biohabitats, like we get from the Watershed Association and these other studies, have a place to be plugged into those systems. And then lead to physical remediation efforts. What we're talking about making a mitigation plan. Not sure how we're going to accomplish that right now, Ed, because what we know is we have interjurisdictional problems. First, we have to get the city to agree to doing that, but there's no other real push right now besides citizen outcry because the city doesn't have an expressed environmental commitment. That's the key element and the foundation of an ISO 14001 system is that top management, be that a private corporation, some other industry, or the city, needs to express that. And then we start working towards this and these become more feasible. So I'm still left out as to, yes, even we decide what's best to physically do. How do we get this is where we start looking at the city as a partner in this management as opposed to an adversarial obstacle. And that's what the systems provide for. So it's long-term thinking on their part to avoid or to work towards, say, carbon neutrality or to work towards, sustainability. The county has a sustainability program. The city has a sustainability program. Why is that still disconnected from the physical processes that are affecting the carbon footprint and the watershed, right? And the impacts on the communities. So specifically, no, I don't have the answer for you, Ed, because I don't see the mechanism in place that it gets done. I'm watching us come up with the best ideas over and over again for 10 years, but there's not a mechanism for implementation. And that doesn't appear on some level, I think, in the city's mind to be, we're being forced to do this, we're being pressured to do this. It has to be of their own initiative. And from what you might hear coming as, because it's not a formal statement of environmental commitment, we can't really piece it together to look at it holistically. There's competing objectives, interdepartmental, bureaucratic, all that. And if you use an EMS, then the EMS becomes part of that bureaucracy and they start working towards it. But to get back to what really has to be done there, first thing is that water has to move. So it is, yes, a matter of some engineering, some dredging, and get the channel back. And then, that vegetation may or may not. You got to go back to the fact that one of the big objections to traditional use in the lower watershed was grazing along the river. That was considered detrimental to the environment and part of one of the factors that made the Santa Fe River one of the at-risk rivers, or I forget, the environmental crisis or what the exact term was, but led it to endangered, to an endangered status. So, yeah, we know what physically has to be done, but, absent of saying, if we got permission, Ed, we're going to use your tractor, you know what I mean? We have to work towards making that mechanism there something that does stand alone and is part of city and county policy, as opposed to, like you say, something that's going to be brought up to successive administrations over and over again as they change.
Thank you, Darren. I know that one of your issues, my issues for years, has been the pooling of the water. And this would go to all of you, particularly maybe Maria and Aaron, but to the rest of you too. If you study the subject and you look at the rules and the regulations on water in New Mexico, let's talk about the reuse of treated effluent. When you allow the reuse of treated effluent on golf courses, one of the rules of the treated effluent is you don't allow it to pool up. And what we've got below the treatment plant is historically poorly treated effluent. And when you use water treated effluent to irrigate, you don't pool it up. Now the city and the county and BLM and another landowner is pooling up this poorly treated effluent to irrigate the wetlands, what they call the wetlands. And so this is contrary to the state regulations that I read them, and also we're not talking about surface water, we're talking about groundwater. And if it's contrary to the regulations to allow well-treated effluent to pool, then we're even more in violation to allow poorly treated effluent to pool. And it would seem to me to be straightforward hydrology and water chemistry and groundwater chemistry to immediately go out and remove the pools. And that's something that can be done. What we have right now, if you want to talk about holistic and sustainable, all these great new words, this is certainly not sustainable, and we're damaging the environment along the lower river. And that would be a simple solution to move us forward, in my opinion.
I think you're right. And I think that right away, what comes into my mind is action on that specific task at our suggestion, it may be, you know, I'm sure that city legal probably considers that, nah, you can't do that, or there's some type of implicit admission that we've done some damage, you know, so that's the interesting part about it. And I think one of the things that gets in our way when we look at the traditional model for how we handle this, which is what we've been doing, and it's not been handled. I don't know. I keep getting back to that. I don't know how, is that part of, maybe that's an initial measure that the coalition puts forward. I don't know if that as a standalone measure or a condition. Again, some of the thinking coming from the coalition started out in terms like settlement agreements or, again, legal terms of art, which are, I think, counterproductive at this point. There's just no time to be doing things the same way we've been doing them.
I agree.
If we got the River Collaborative and we got the Watershed Association and whoever else we could get to join us and present this to the city, in the county, and to BLM, this is an area of critical environmental concern. And also, I agree with you 100%, Darren, about the liability that the city is faced with, also the county, Maria, by not addressing some simple, obvious, hazard to our community.
I think we're pretty clear in terms of the issues and problems. And I think that what I would suggest, maybe Felicity and I will put together maybe a short letter to the city and county about some of these issues, specifically in regard to the wetlands, water testing, and water quantity and water quality testing. And so we'll do that within the next week or 10 days and get that out to everybody so we can have a discussion to see how we want to go forward. But I just think it's time, and it's something certainly we have the attention, and it may be something that we can have the coalition involved with too. I mean, this is where we're still kind of working out relationships. And so it's I know they're very interested in what we're doing. We're very interested in what they're doing. And certainly there's some cross efforts that are going to be really helpful going forward. Okay, what else do we need to talk about today? Any other matters? One of the things that I'm working with the Santa Fe Water Policy Advisory Committee is a drought declaration, which I think is kind of ironic in that they haven't really declared the drought yet, because I don't know why, because we've been in a drought for quite a while. But this will be a more formal announcement that will be going before the county commission. I think at the end of the month is the plan. And one of the things I've offered to do is it's something like 56% of all the water users in Santa Fe County are either on wells or small mutual domestic systems. And so they're outside of the communication network of the bigger systems, obviously. And so how we get the message to them about the drought and what they can do to help mitigate the droughters is one of those challenges that, as Felicity knows, I'm kind of crazy to accept that challenge and try to reach out to those people. But it's pretty interesting. Some of the research I've already done, and specifically with Roger Taylor, they have, through his number of associations that he belongs to, an email list of over 10,000 people. That's huge. And so that would be one resource that we would use to start to communicate water issues with through the Water Policy Advisory Committee. And then it gets to local areas like La Cienega. So we can do emails. We can't do emails here because I would venture to say about half the community isn't going to be able to take advantage of that resource. And so that becomes more public notices, postings, and in particular in La Cienega, those need to be in Spanish, not just English, because I would say we have at least a 30 to 40% Mexican immigrant population. And I'm probably way out in terms of numbers, but there's a significant immigrant population that needs to understand the water issues. And we haven't done a very good job of educating them. But it's going to be, and it really goes back to what we're dealing with all along, that we really need to pay attention to how bad the water situation is. And we need to move past that and get to a point, apologize about that, get to a point where everybody understands that this water situation is serious. It's not something we can put off. I mean, one of the things I've seen, and maybe I'm wrong, Andy, please correct me if I am, but it seems like the city has sat back and said, we're handling the drought. We got it taken care of. Don't worry about no water in the river because we've got those wells, the Buckman wells, and they've been rested for 10 years, and now we're going to be able to tap into them, and we'll be able to survive this drought. Well, that to me is fool's gold. And so I'm just, again, the key issues is just educating people and making sure people understand where we live in a high desert plateau, that we have limited water resources. I remember, this is 20 years ago, but I remember talking to a county commissioner at the time, talking about water issues in La Cienega. He says, La Cienega's got too much water. And so that's the kind of outdated ideas that we need to get past and get people to understand how serious things are. And certainly La Cienega has its share of concerns, but we are going to push very heavily. And I think this may be part of the mitigation plan, is to bring in county water into the northern edge of the community, where all the lot split homes have appeared, somewhere between 400 and 500 homes in the last 30 years, and be able to get them off the wells, allow the springs to come back, and then that will feed into the river, and then Ed and La Bajada and everybody will benefit as a result. So that's kind of where I'm coming. Anyway, any other things? Andy, you got something?
I was just going to point out Christine Chavez has her hand up.
Oh, Christine, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
No problem. I wasn't trying to clap. I was trying to raise my hand. So I'm sorry for that. I just wanted to point out that, the messaging is out there, that the city is fine on the supply end, and we've got all our sources to pull from. But from a water conservation standpoint, you will never, ever hear me say that. So I kind of share the concerns of this group and understand that we do have challenges ahead of us. And for water conservation, that job never ends, or we're never in a safe place to call it good. And so I don't know how to balance that messaging, with the conservation end, because it's coming from a different point of view. I mean, from the source of supply end, Jesse, can talk about all our sources and how they affect one another. But for me, I'm on the same page as all of you. I realize we are in a very different time, a mega drought. There's very limited resources that we need to look at moving forward. And so the work for me and my group never ends. And so I just wanted to, I wasn't applauding. I was just trying to voice my concern. Is it's hard to balance out that message sometimes, but my message is a little bit different.
And it's absolutely appreciated, Christine.
It sounds, Carl, like we're getting toward the end.
Yep.
I've got to go to another meeting. I do want to express my great appreciation to all of you, and Andy, Felicity with the Watershed Association, and Carl and you and the rest of you for your time and effort and concern about the issues that we have in the lower river, and your help. Thank you very much, and I will see y'all soon.
Thanks, Ed. Aaron, I know we're all getting off, but Aaron, I really want to thank you for your contribution, to everybody's contribution today, as always. This is, as I explained to the county commission, there's no water in New Mexico that's simple or easy to understand or deal with. And we have our share of complexities. I think one of the questions that Aaron has is whether there's been any wetland studies, and I don't know of any study that's been done on that wetlands, and obviously that would be a great thing to have happen. So again, thank you all. We will, one of the things I realized I didn't do are the notes from our last meeting and notes from this meeting, which I'll put together, because I think there are a whole lot of things that have been said that we need to share with all the collaborative members so they have a clear understanding of what's going on. And I'll certainly include information about the Pipeline Coalition and how that's kind of evolved. And I agree with Darren, we're heavy on attorneys there, and not that that's a bad thing, but sometimes the language gets a little complex and difficult to communicate with. But anyway, thanks to you all. Let's keep in touch. You guys, and again, Andy, thanks for the Watershed for hosting this as always. So we'll see you soon, and we'll get out those notes hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and we can go from there. Thanks, everyone. Thank you very much.
I'll throw out a last quick thing here that it'll be on our website, this recording,
Everybody, bye-bye.
in about 3 days.
Thank you, Andy.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Just before we split, Carl, that I didn't see any Forest Service today. And we have at least been given a notification that they're have approved by the 3 northern forests, the I guess watershed and riparian treatment and restoration and beaver treatment and all this. And I don't know why we're not getting that information more directly from a collaborative participant.
Andy, you know anything about that?
Well, I mean, I know what Darren's talking about, but I agree, the Forest Service hasn't exactly been forthcoming with getting the word out of what it means besides potential project funding. And
Right.
so
Well,
I
they
think
made
that's
that
what,
plan, so maybe some of this research that we're looking for is in there.
yeah, I think so. So, cool.
Who should
We
we get
need
to
to
look
bring
at?
him in. Sandy Herlocker would be the regional, district.
Is
forest.
he still around?
Yeah.
Yep.
I just talked
Okay.
to him yesterday.
I'll be, hey, would you, Darren, just send me the questions you want Sandy to respond to, and let me get it out to him today.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you again to everyone.
I'm cutting everybody off. There you go. Bye-bye, you guys.